Sonic Generations came out 13 years ago for the PS3 and Xbox 360, and I thought it was a pretty good game. So when Sega announced this kind of remake, kind of port of Sonic Generations for the Nintendo Switch, I was relatively excited about it. I wasn't over the moon, I wasn't jumping up and down like Chris Chan, but I was definitely ready to play Sonic Generations again. What I didn't expect is the extra sort of Bowser's Fury add-on to Sonic Generations, Shadow Generations, would actually be way better than the Sonic campaign. It's so much better. It's almost as if they made that game first and then they slapped on Sonic Generations as sort of a bonus. Not the other way around, which is really cool. While Bowser's Fury was certainly an amazing experience, I wouldn't say that it was the main draw. Obviously, Super Mario 3D World was the main event. With this game, I actually think the Shadow campaign is the main event. You should buy this game not as a port of Sonic Generations. I would buy this game because it's a Shadow game that has a extra port of Sonic Generations on the side. That's not to say that Sonic Generations is a bad game, and it's not to say that it's a bad port, but it is a 13-year-old game, whereas the Shadow campaign is a 2024 game with all of the lessons learned over the past 13 years. So obviously it has a better chance of being a better game, and it is a better game. So how is it better? Well, the Shadow campaign has a overworld that you can actually traverse and do side quests, sort of like a mini version of Sonic Frontiers. You can't really do that in the Sonic Generations campaign. I'm not saying the hub world is incredible, but it's pretty good, and I actually enjoy it. Another thing I enjoy is the power-ups that Shadow acquires throughout the game. It gives the game a lot of variety. It makes it feel like a fresh take on a Sonic type of experience. So with Sonic, you're running fast, you're doing spin dashes, you're doing homing attacks, and that's pretty much the extent of Sonic's abilities. Now Shadow has a lot of different abilities, like he can shoot people, he can surf on the water automatically, he can kick enemies up into the air and punch them away, and you can basically teleport to that area. A lot of different things which you can't really do with Sonic, and so it's more fun to play as Shadow because he has more gameplay. It makes sense. Now, in the Sonic campaign, you do have different power-ups sprinkled around the levels, but they were not permanent power-ups, and they were not really that fun. At least to me. They were okay, but they were not that exciting. It's kind of like the Sonic Colors power-ups. I like Sonic Colors, but it wasn't because of the power-ups. The power-ups in Sonic Colors were like, meh, they were okay, but they were nothing to write home about. Shadow actually has some pretty cool power-ups that are more enjoyable than the type of power-ups you would find in Sonic Colors or in the Sonic campaign of Sonic Generations. I'd also like to praise the difficulty of this game. It's not super hard, but it's not super easy, and I think it's actually, I would say, close to the perfect difficulty. Just like Shadow is the quote-unquote perfect life form, I think this is the perfect difficulty. There are some cheap deaths, but not really that many, and I think that most of the deaths that you encounter in the game are your own fault, and you just need to practice and do it again. Luckily, when you die, there's basically no waiting around. You go right back into the action. The game really doesn't waste your time, and that's something I appreciate. The story, let's be honest, the story is not Shakespeare. It's not that great, but it's actually one of the better stories in the Sonic franchise. So if you're a Sonic fan, you might think it's the most amazing story ever told, move over the Bible. But for most people, it's not going to really knock your socks off. The cinematics, though, and a lot of the action scenes that you'll encounter throughout the game are very cool. Very cool. I'd say they're some of the best CGI or some of the best movie scenes that you'll see in Sonic history. Now, in terms of performance on Nintendo Switch, I believe the game runs at 30 frames per second. I don't think it's a smooth, 100% consistent 30 frames per second all the time, but I will say this. the game really did surpass my expectations. This game runs better than Sonic Frontiers in my experience. I will say that the Sonic campaign seems to be running at a higher resolution than the Shadow campaign, which makes sense because the Shadow campaign is obviously much newer. It's a 2024 game versus a port of a 13-year-old game. The Shadow campaign, at times it does look pixelated, but honestly, I'm just amazed that it's running this well on the Nintendo Switch, which is a 7-year-old mobile platform. It looks great if your expectations for the Nintendo Switch are realistic, right? This is not a Pokemon Scarlet Violet situation where it runs like garbage and it looks like garbage. It actually looks pretty good, and it actually runs good enough to the point where I don't feel bad that I'm playing the Nintendo Switch version. I think it's perfectly serviceable. So if you only own a Nintendo Switch, I would say don't worry about it. This is good enough. If you have an Xbox, if you have a PS5, maybe go ahead and buy those versions because it's obviously going to run better. But if you only own a Nintendo Switch, or if you want to play on the go portably, this is a perfectly fine, decent enough port that it's not going to make you angry that you bought the Switch version rather than some other version. It's very fun. In my experience, it doesn't really have that many issues on Switch. Maybe somebody else whose full-time job is to examine pixels and count pixels will tell you, oh no, this version sucks. But if you're a real human being, this is fine, okay? It's a fine port. Now, I've mostly been playing the Shadow campaign because it's so much better than the Sonic campaign. Problem with that, of course, is that the campaign is only about 6 to 7 hours. However, I'm kind of tired of big open world games that last 100 hours but really kind of suck after 10 hours. I would much rather have a linear or semi-linear game like this where it's really fun and it never outstays its welcome and you can replay it again and again and again. Like, I love Donkey Kong Country. I've probably put in like 20-30 hours over the years in that game, even though that game's only like an hour or 2 hours long or something. I much prefer replayable games like Ocarina of Time. I love Ocarina of Time. I can replay that all the time, but I'm not really going to replay Breath of the Wild. So Ocarina of Time is a longer game than Breath of the Wild because I actually want to replay it. And I feel like this is the case with the Shadow campaign. It's not very long, but I think, in 5 years, I'll probably play it again. In another 5 years, I'll probably play it again. So yeah, it's short, but I think that's fine. I didn't really like Sonic Frontiers. I thought it outstayed its welcome. It didn't really catch me in the same way that this game did. So Sonic fans finally have a great game in the modern generation, and I would give this game a 8.5 out of 10, at least. On a side note, however, I know IGN gave this game a 9 out of 10, but they gave Dragon Ball Z Sparking Zero a 7. I'm going to say, as someone that has played Sparking Zero like 20 hours or something, and this game, I don't think that Sparking Zero is a 7. I know that's completely unrelated to this video, but I think Sparking Zero is on the same quality as this game, if not better. So IGN sucks, everybody knows that. This game's an 8.5 in my opinion, and Sparking Zero is like an 8.5 or a 9. But anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.